welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got a superb podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by one of our good friends, Riley Frain. He does an incredible job over at the Portal Report. Coupled with that, I know that he's doing amazing work over at Mid-Major Madness, getting set for the upcoming season. We do have to chat with him about some of the mid-major teams that he is feeling relatively bullish on for the upcoming season. Initially, we have to talk about all the coaching hoopla that we've seen, and if there might be a team or two that was involved in all the coaching hoopla that might see a few guys enter in the transfer portal before the start of the season. So we'll dive in there. He has a big specialty for taking a look at Northeast mid-majors. We're going to take a look at some of those teams that he's feeling bullish on and just some of the characteristics of teams that he likes to see as well. We're going to certainly talk a lot about the Northeast Conference. We're going to dive in on the Metro Atlantic and so much more with him. So it's going to be a great fun and great chatter with our good friend Riley. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, there's EM. The name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever with EdgeBoost. 100% of gambling transactions do get approved. You get cashback rewards as you utilize EdgeBoost, and when you go to EdgeBoost.bet, make sure you put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That'll get you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's chat it up with our good friend Riley. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at easy enough. His first and last name, Riley Frain. That last name is spelled F-R-A-I-N. And Riley, it is always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Greg. Thank you for having me, man. We're just chatting 3 weeks away from the season here. It's getting close, and it's an exciting time of year. I'm looking forward to chatting with you about it a little bit. Some crazy stuff happening around the world of college basketball, but we're getting close to the tip-off, so always exciting.
Yes, it is always exciting. And Riley, we have seen a lot of coaching news. As a matter of fact, last time we had you on about a month or so ago, we were talking about Steve Donahue taking over at St. Joe's. That was move number 1, and we thought, wow, that's a big piece of coaching news coming out here in September. Well, we had 3 other coaching moves made. Cal State Bakersfield, as we know, that's probably the worst of them all. Obviously, Auburn with the passing of the torch from Bruce Pearl on over to Stephen Pearl. We saw what happened over at Wofford, and we nearly had something go on with Tarleton State with Billy Gillespie putting on leave. He's back in the fold, so that'll be something to monitor. But just what have you made out of this coaching news? Because typically we get like 1 or 2 of these in September/October, and this year it's been way, way more.
And even when you missed out on what's going on over at Wagner with Donald Copeland, who's currently on suspension, and they've really yet to announce everything. So yeah, just to your point, Greg, there's so much going on. It's a crazy time of year. You feel for the student athletes, like we're 3 weeks out from the season now, and a lot of these guys in some of the situations you just listed, whether it be Wofford or in St. Joe's, who I know is maybe a little bit more solidified and sort of heading forward to next season. But you feel for a lot of the student athletes, there's a lot of uncertainty heading into the season. 3 weeks to go, they've sort of committed to being a part of whichever program they may have committed to for the upcoming season, and now they're sort of trying to figure things out with a different man at the helm, and it's just a really tough time of year to do it 3 weeks out from the season. It makes building a roster tough. It makes finding the next head coach you're looking for tough in terms of an athletic department and what they have to do. Overall you feel a little bit for the coaches 3 weeks from the season if someone were to get ousted by an athletic department, but for the most part it's a lot of guys who are trying to step away just before the season starting, maybe reading the writing on the wall. They don't necessarily like how the situation is playing out. There's been a couple cases where guys getting sort of let go by the athletic department, but yeah, just overall a tough time of year, a lot of unique situations going on throughout different athletic departments. I said it already, but you feel for the student athletes in these situations and all the uncertainty it creates. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about sort of the transfer portal implications with some of these programs. I know a lot of them still have time for players to potentially enter the transfer portal here, but yeah, just overall the uncertainty of it is crazy. With a month to go, I can't remember an off season over the past couple of years since I've started covering college basketball really where we had so many coaching changes or even just so many sort of coaching storylines popping up with a month to go before the season. So just a really unique time of the year for sure, Greg.
Yep, and unless if I missed something over at Wofford and St. Joe's, because pretty much there are 30 days to be able to enter into the transfer portal as we're doing this conversation. That has came and went. Really didn't see a whole heck of a lot there. The one that I think could be interesting is Cal State Bakersfield, because I just don't think anyone's transferring away from Auburn, mainly because they'd be losing out on a lot of money. We know that there's deep pockets out there in the SEC, so even if they don't necessarily love Stephen Pearl, they'll probably just get their paycheck and maybe collect that and then move on the next year. But that said, I think that the Bakersfield situation is interesting because because, like I said, we really didn't see anyone from Wofford go away from the program. We really didn't see that over at St. Joe's either. But with Bakersfield, that just feels like such a toxic situation that I wouldn't be surprised if someone here in the next week or two decides, hey, this is just not for me. I don't want any part of this.
To your point, Greg, as you kind of pointed out, with the Auburn situation, even looking back on the St. Joe's situation, certainly having somebody, in the program able to take over, at the helm who's been with the team at least for the past couple of months with Steve Donahue in the St. Joe situation. I know he was kind of more recently brought on, but, just having someone who's familiar with the players, who knows sort of the system, who understands the program's looking for, it makes it, easier for a lot of these guys to potentially be interested in staying. I know, as you said, Greg, the SEC is a very specific example. They have a lot of money to throw around. And as you pointed out, maybe even if players don't like, Coach Pearl's son there, who's taking over, they might be more willing to stay just based on, NIL and obviously the opportunity to play in the SEC. But yes, just to my initial point, I think it makes it a little easier when you have somebody taking over at the helm, whether it's an interim or not, who's sort of been a part of the program and knows these guys and knows what it means. I think that in this era of the transfer portal, I think that means a lot to these guys. I look at the Cal State Bakersfield situation. I know Rod Barnes has really struggled there over the past couple of years. I'm not sure the nature of it. I know you mentioned how it was kind of played out toxic. I'm not sure how much time the players have to enter the transfer portal given on that situation. I think if I'm not mistaken, they still have the window still open for some of them. Yeah, you mentioned it, a toxic situation. You feel like it always makes it tough for these players to stay. I'm certainly not here to speculate on how things are going to play out or how they did play out, but you have to imagine, even without a ton of scholarship opportunities out there at Division I level, Cal State Bakersfield is a respectable program coming from a solid conference in the Big West. I'd have to imagine that there would be some teams out there who are maybe looking to add, be a program out there who's looking to bring on one guy late, might be interested in some of the guys who are leaving that Cal State Bakersfield roster. They produced some really solid transfer portal pieces that last year, and I'm not necessarily sure off the top of my head who they retained. I would say the Big West is not necessarily my niche of coverage, but it's just to your point, Greg. I mean, a toxic situation always makes it tough to see these guys stay. I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to see a handful of these Cal State Bakersfield guys start to go, but I'm not sure either. They've announced who's taking over at the helm yet. You might have that information. Just a toxic situation makes it tough for players to stay, but just in the inverse, having somebody like a St. Joe's or an Auburn, having somebody on the roster, on the staff, who's able to take over and sort of maintain that continuity. I think that's always a huge thing for a lot of players right now, given the time period we're in 3 weeks out from the season.
And Mike Scott is the interim coach for Cal State Bakersfield. He was with the program for a little bit, so it's not like he's completely unfamiliar or anything like that. And I know that he played a little bit of college basketball. I believe that he played over at Fairleigh Dickinson, if I'm not mistaken. So he's got a nice knowledge of the landscape of college basketball. But no doubt about it, just an absolutely brutal situation out there. As Riley Frain, he does such great work over at the Portal Report, along with Mid-Major Madness. He's joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. That is certainly something to be monitoring, but now we're in mid-October, and now something that a lot of people monitor are these exhibition matchups, these anti-air quotes here, secret scrimmages, which I think is probably the dumbest name ever because your results always get out, so they're really not a secret. And sometimes you're able to find film of these secret scrimmages as well. It might be Zapruder film, but you can oftentimes find some sort of film. But what do you make out of these results? Because there have been times over the last few years where there have been people just buying into these results, and all of a sudden that team that looked so good on that one day in a scrimmage just goes completely down the toilet bowl. And there are other times where it's actually legit.
Yeah, I mean, the chaos of the secret scrimmages is unheralded. I mean, you look on Twitter and we have burner accounts who are tweeting out fake score lines that are, I know LaSalle, a bunch of LaSalle fans got.
This is truly Jonathan's time of year to shine, baby.
Yes, certainly. The burner accounts are certainly coming out from the woodwork here. What sort of stock do I place in these? I would say just by nature of sort of the chaos of it. And, a lot of teams are getting ready for the season. I think even heading into week one of the season, a lot of teams are still figuring out who they are. What a lot of coaches are figuring out what their rotation is going to look like, who's going to be contributing who's going to be playing how many minutes. So when you look at the preseason scrimmages that we're doing now 3 weeks out from the season, I don't think I'm necessarily placing a ton of stock in them. A lot of them, even to me, seem a little bit unrealistic because you get a lot of high majors who are willing to travel to play a scrimmage against a mid-major program, which most high major programs will not do during the season, which always makes scheduling really tough. But I think that presents some exciting opportunities for mid-majors too to test themselves against some of the, the best teams in the country potentially. And there's just a lot of moving parts with all these scrimmages. I feel like, coaches are testing out different rotations, how different guys are going to play in different positions, just what the team's going to look like overall. There's so many moving parts in these scrimmages. So I try not to place a lot of stock in them. But yes, Greg, to your point, it's hard not to see some of the box scores that pop up on Twitter or the occasional film we get to see online and, not get excited about these teams. The big one, I know that LaSalle did not actually play Rutgers in a scrimmage, but I know there was a tweet going around saying LaSalle had beat Rutgers in a secret scrimmage, and it's a chaotic time of year.
Secret scrimmage that didn't even happen.
Exactly, a secret scrimmage that didn't even happen. So it's a chaotic time of year. I enjoy when the box scores come up. I try not to place too much stock in them. I think the biggest thing for me was I wish a lot of these programs would be more willing to, broadcast or at least post scores and box scores from these secret scrimmages, because I just think, especially for a lot of the programs I cover, some of them are a little bit smaller, and this is an opportunity to maybe test yourself against a bigger school. I think it's a good opportunity to promote yourself. And so, being able to broadcast that game, even if it's just on a live stream somewhere on your school's website or on YouTube, or, there's a lot of different ways you can go about it nowadays. So yeah, I mean, the chaos of it is a little bit annoying at times. I wish it was a little bit more, brought to the forefront, and teams were more willing to sort of broadcast their secret scrimmages and whatnot. But yeah, overall, I try not to place too much stock in this time of year. I think a lot of the programs are really, really, really still figuring themselves out. It's so early. I think, like I said, even by week one, we'll still have a lot of teams figuring each other out. So yeah, I just try to enjoy it as it comes, Greg. You laugh about it here and there, but I try not to take it too seriously. They're just enjoyable. I think it's good opportunities to maybe familiarize yourself with some of the new guys on the rosters.
Absolutely, and I think that you bring up something so good as well. How much do you think that this is a good learning opportunity to figure out a little bit more about the individual players rather than the team itself? Because I do think that with regards to these secret scrimmages, it's mix and match. A lot of these coaches, they just, for lack of a better term, they want to figure out what they've got. And some of these guys, they really, really shine. Like I remember Seth Trimble last year, he had a really good result. I think it was against Memphis or something like that. And obviously had a solid year for North Carolina. And then there are other times as well. Like I know that there's a lot of people blowing up that UW Green Bay actually held with Bradley for quite a bit of time. I think maybe we could take away that Marcus Hall is going to be rock solid, but still not probably buying Green Bay very much.
Sure. Again, I try not to place too much stock in the whole, but I think it's an exciting time. Every coach coming into the season is going to tell you they like your roster. I think every coach would tell you coming into the season that every coach is going to tell you.
If they don't tell you that, that's a big concern.
Exactly. So, I think to your point, in the offseason, a lot of guys are excited. Everyone thinks they know how to fight until they get punched in the mouth, so to speak, I think is a good expression. It's a good way to not only test the whole and your game plan and what you want to do as a head coach. I think particularly for new guys who are sort of getting the reins of it, whether it be their first head coaching role or just a brand new program, whatever it may be. But yeah, to exactly your point, Greg, it's a great opportunity to figure out, hey, who's going to be the guy? If you have a brand new roster, I think of LaSalle right now, who's going through a head coaching change and is going to have pretty much a whole new starting lineup. I've filled up transfer portal guys, a couple of freshmen here and there, and whatever it may be. This is an opportunity for a team like LaSalle to go out there and say, hey, who's going to be the guy? Who are the two guys who can average double digits for us and be the primary scorers we need? Who's going to be our best defensive player that we can rely on for a big play down the other end? Who's the guy who can guard somebody 1 through 5 and their mobility is really going to make a difference. It's tough to test all those things in practice, to have a good understanding of that in practice just by playing against one another. These scrimmages, I don't think teams are allowed to play a lot of them. If I'm not mistaken, there's sort of some NCAA regulations on how many they're even allowed to do, and it sort of falls into the practice guidelines. I'm not too familiar, but yes, I think it's a great opportunity for teams to sort of figure out their game plan, but within that, you need to figure out who's going to be sort of the leaders of your roster, who are going to be the guys doing the most damage. And I think these scrimmages not only provide opportunities to test yourself against other teams, again, to figure out your game plan, but then to figure out who's going to be the leaders on your team heading into the season with so much roster turnover just over the course of the offseason.
Yep, I think that is so well said by you, because there is always a lot of volatility. Sometimes just don't know what you're getting out of these teams in general. So I do think that that's so well said by you, as Riley Frain, who does such great work over at the Portal Report. He also does an amazing job over at Mid-Major Madness. He's joining me on Cusco Hoops, and it has been a month since we've had Riley on the podcast. So coming up on the flip side, we'll transition away from the exhibition results, and we'll just chat with him about some of the teams that he's feeling bullish/bearish on, some of the teams that he's maybe changing his tune on a little bit as well. He does a great job taking a look at the northeast part of the country, a lot of the mid-majors, and we'll be talking about those schools next, right here on Cusco Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VC Family Podcast. Las Vegas for Cusco Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast. It is always a pleasure to have Riley Frain aboard. He does such great work over at the Portal Report. He does an amazing job over at Mid-Major Madness as well, which is right now his main beat with the season getting started up. You want to follow him on Twitter/X at Riley Frain. Last name is spelled Frain. And Riley, how about if we do talk about some of the teams that you're starting to change your tune on a little bit, as it has been about a month since we last had you on. As a matter of fact, last time we had you on, we were talking about the Steve Donahue news, him taking over at St. Joe's. And just as you've been evaluating over the last month or so, maybe you were influenced a little bit by one of those scrimmage results, by some of the practices that we've been seeing, some of the reports that we're hearing, what have you. But are there a few teams that you're feeling a little bit more bullish/bearish on now that we've reached the fall months?
Sure. Well, I was lucky enough to recently do some contributions for the Center Hub's preseason preview magazine, and I was lucky enough to preview sort of the MAC, the NEC, and the ASUN for them. If I can, I'd love to talk about some of the teams from that conference.
Please.
I don't typically do a ton of ASUN coverage, but it sort of falls, within my realm of I'll pitch in for our ASUN coverage at Mid-Major Madness, and so getting to dive into it this offseason and talk to some of the coaches there was an absolute blast. I think this Eastern Kentucky team is going to be really exciting. Coach A.W. Hamilton able to retain some guys like Amir Wall, Turner Buttrey, Montavious Myrick. I think 3 guys who could potentially be all-conference players this year. But then on top of that, mid-major to low-major conference like the ASUN, he's bringing in 2 premier transfer portal talent in Amar Knox, who's just improved constantly every year at Alabama State and was an all-conference selection in the SWAC this past season. Another guy that they're bringing in from the transfer portal on Cranford, who was NEC Rookie of the Year over at St. Francis. And, when I was covering him in the NEC Championship last year, a guy who just looked like an absolute veteran out there playing like a freshman. So really impressive transfer portal haul for an Eastern Kentucky team that I think is could be a top of the conference this year. I look at a team like Queens, I'm really bullish on, and unfortunately they just lost their star point guard, Bryce Cash, who's stepping away from college basketball for some personal reasons. But the only team in the conference in the ASUN who was able to return an all-conference selection last year from Chris Ashby, who I think has a good shot at being Conference Player of the Year. I really like that Queens team. At North Alabama, able to return a lot of talent. So just overall, I'm a little bit bullish on the top half of this ASUN. I think that top maybe 5-6 teams are all really competitive. There's a lot of interesting storylines between, a new head coach over at Lipscomb. There's more talent returning around the conference than you would think. And Queens obviously bringing back an all-conference selection. And Austin Peay was able to retain the ASUN Rookie of the Year. Greg Yesif, who I was bullish on. Just overall, the top half of the ASUN, I think, is really exciting. It's a conference that I think is going to be really close this year. People are going to want to keep an eye on around the league overall. I know we talk about the NEC a little bit, and of course, Long Island's the easy team there to talk about with all their returning talent, Malachi Davis and Jamal Fuller. So I won't talk about the Sharks too much, but just a couple teams around the conference I like. I'm really excited about Stonehill and everything they were able to return. They were able to bring back Herman Kofi, who was in that all freshman conversation in the NEC last year, and Chaz Stinson, who I think has a shot to be Defensive Player of the Year in the conference and was a starter for them last year, and a guy like Ethan Muser, who's a really solid stretch 4, shot almost 40% from three-point range last year as sort of a 6'8", 6'9" forward. I look at a conference like the NEC, pretty far down the totem pole in terms of, high major, mid-major, low major, however you want to define it. And, it's just surprising some of the talent that some of these teams were able to retain. Even at Central Connecticut State, bringing back another all-freshman selection in Darren Smith, and a sophomore like Max Frazier, who was starting some games for them last year and has some experience in the MAC at Siena. Of course, Coach Patrick Sellers at Central Connecticut State, really known for his player development. So, yeah, I think in the NEC, I'm really excited about sort of that top 3 or 4. I think there's a lot of interesting storylines around the conference as well. We touched on Wagner and what's going on over there earlier. I think Mercyhurst in year 2 here of Division I basketball could be an exciting team in the NEC. But, yeah, the big storyline for me there and what I'm bullish on is sort of how much talent that conference was able to retain. I think for a low major conference, it's really interesting this year. But, yeah, LIU definitely has the inside track. I know we've talked about that a couple times on your podcast before. I'll keep my MAC analysis pretty brief. I think the big storyline here is Quinnipiac sort of going for the three-peat. It's hard not to be excited about them and what they can do this year, returning, Amari Monroe, who was all-conference player of the year last year in the MAC. Keeping an all-conference player in a conference like this it's unheard of. And on top of that, they're bringing back a freshman selection, Jaden Zimmerman, who, Coach Pecora tells me he's excited to see take a pretty big jump this year and will be a guy who's going to start a handful of games. Outside of Quinnipiac, I look at sort of this top 5 and what's exciting about it, and sort of the group to me is maybe Quinnipiac, Marist, Manhattan, Sacred Heart. You could put in there. Siena is absolutely going to be in the mix and take a jump this year from 8th and could be a top 4 team. That top 5 that I sort of just ran through there, including Quinnipiac, and they're all returning a ton of talent, which I think is really exciting and interesting. A team like Manhattan returning Evan Dinkins, who was 6th man of the year, and bringing back Wilson Dorr, who was all-conference rookie of the year in the MAC. Jaden Winston, who is their star point guard and averaged almost 5 assists per game. Frazier Roxburgh, who fellow MAC enthusiast Sam Fetterman thinks is going to take a big jump this year and potentially be an all-conference guy. So, just I look at the top half of the MAC, those 5 teams I kind of noted between Quinnipiac, Marist, Manhattan, Sacred Heart, Siena, and I think it's a really strong top 5 that's returning so much talent, which makes it exciting in an era of the transfer portal. You know, you get to know some of these guys, you get to return them year over year. So I think this top 5, top 6 in the MAC is really exciting. I think Iona and what they were able to do with Coach Griot coming from the NBA and all the transfer portal talent they were able to bring in is really exciting. Obviously, a lot of new pieces there, so it's going to be a bit of a transition period. But yeah, I'm rambling a little bit here. So I think that top 5 sort of in the MAC is really exciting this year. I'm really bullish on.
And I am very bullish on Manhattan myself. I actually picked Manhattan to win the conference this year, so I think that they're going to be in for a good year with Will Sidner and company. So that MAC is going to be amazing. It is going to be great to see what we get out of Long Island as well. I know that they've got some big games coming up early on during the season. I think that they're going to be impressing some people. So I love that you bring up those teams, and I know you are very hard at work to get set for this upcoming season, Riley. You've been doing great work over at the Portal Report. Now that obviously the transfers, aside from maybe Kelsey Bakersfield, are now in the rear view mirror, I know you're doing a great job of evaluating these rosters and so much more. So love the good people at home. Know it's all on tap for you, and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Absolutely, Greg. I mean, you said it. It's an exciting time of year, so thank you for having me on. I'm always grateful to be here, to get an opportunity to promote my work, to get a chance to talk college basketball with you. You know, you're so knowledgeable as well, so thank you. But you guys can find me on social media at Riley Frain, RILEYFRAIN. Greg mentioned it. I'm doing a lot of work for Mid-Major Madness, sort of a mid-major focus coverage along the East Coast, and I work at the Portal Report as well, where we do tons of transfer portal coverage. Obviously, that's starting to slow down a little bit, and the mid-major coverage is definitely starting to pick up a lot more, but just tons of fun stuff going on over there. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier on the show, but I was lucky enough to contribute to the Center Hub's preseason preview magazine this year, which just went live Monday, October 13th. You can find a link to potentially purchase that on my social media if you're interested. We put in a lot of hard work over there and covering all 365 programs from around the country. Yeah, for those who might be interested in that, come check it out. But yeah, just again, thank you so much, Greg, for having me. It's always a pleasure.
It is always great to get Riley aboard. Every single time he joins me, he lends such amazing insights. He did so once again today, and I know that he, much like myself, very hard at work to get set for the upcoming college basketball season. So big thanks to Riley for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, RCM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. We are up to over 2,150 straight days without a missed podcast, so you can bank on me being with you guys once again tomorrow. And we are getting almost all set with regards to our conference previews. We've got one conference left to do a preview podcast for. That'll be the Big Ten. That'll be coming up within the next few days, maybe the next week or so, as we got plenty of time there, but we're less than 3 weeks away from the start of the college basketball season. I'm starting my handicap lines. You're going to be getting picks and analysis on every single game, every single day, once those games are back in our lives. So I appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.